Good morning, Earthlings! Welcome to Vice News' live coverage of NASA's Crew-2 launch on board SpaceX's Crew Dragon. I'm Becky Ferreira, and I'm joined by Guillory Darabi.
Good morning, Becky. It's nice and early here in Los Angeles. It's 2:30 in the morning. What about for you?
It's 5:30, so a little bit more acceptable. I really appreciate you coming at such an early hour. I guess it's still night.
Who wouldn't get up for a launch? This is really exciting. We've got 4 astronauts representing 3 different nations, blasting off in less than 20 minutes from Cape Canaveral in Florida. They are headed to the International Space Station to join Expedition 65. It's really exciting.
Yeah, this is actually the second commercial crew rotation following the Crew-1 launch last November. And it's also the first commercial spaceflight with 2 international astronauts. Thomas Pesquet of France and Akihiko Hoshida of Japan will be joining NASA astronauts Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur for the trip.
So what are you most excited about for this? I know this is your jam. You've got the space show. You've been covering this for a long time. I want to know, what are you most excited about?
Well, I think it's just really cool to be having these launches back on American soil. You covered the Crew-1 launch that was really, really interesting as well. And I'm a big fan of the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. It's great. It has a long history. It's like goes back to the 60s, which is quite unusual. So no shade on the Soyuz. But for the last 10 years, of course, if you wanted to go to space, you had to use it. And it's really cool to now see, not only spacecraft return to the US, but also this really interesting new commercial strategy of having SpaceX and Boeing and companies like that provide the spacecraft as opposed to a NASA kind of vehicle. What about you? What are you looking forward to here?
I know we're all really, amped to see Crew-2 launch safely and take off today, but that also means that Crew-1 will be coming back. So what I'm really interested in is, how do you successfully and safely bring a crew of astronauts who are already at the ISS back home safely? And if SpaceX and NASA can really demonstrate that in a really safe and fluid way, that to me is like a really complete loop and an exciting thing.
Absolutely. There's so much focus on the launch, but it is obviously really important that these things are round trips. You don't want astronauts just stranded at the ISS forever. So yeah, it will be really interesting to see that. And I believe a crew just returned to Earth, I think on the Soyuz in Kazakhstan last week. And so yeah, it's great to have these multiple different modes of being able to travel to space and come back, and it's exciting to see. For sure.
Yeah, I'm also really interested in the handover. Like, what happens when the 4 arrive and then the other 4 are set to leave? Like, what are those few days that they have together like, and what's the protocol?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting that it's going to be quite a crowded station for a little bit there. I wonder what the mood and atmosphere is going to be like, right? Because it's going to be, I think, up to 11 or 12 people for a little while. It'll be kind of a cozy station when normally there's a lot fewer astronauts. So that will be interesting. And yeah, it's really interesting to see these crews come into development later this year. Boeing is supposed to also put their Starliner capsule into use. So I think it really represents a sea change, and that's fascinating as well. And as always, any expedition, they're doing incredible science missions. So I'm very stoked to see what they come up with in terms of that.
Yeah, what are some of the missions that you've clued into that you think are especially important at this time?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the last couple of years, there's been such interesting stuff going on at the ISS. We had that really fascinating twin study where astronauts Scott Kelly and Mark Kelly, identical twins, Scott Kelly was in space for a year and Mark Kelly was on the ground. And so given that they are kind of copies of each other genetically, it was really cool to see how space actually changed Scott Kelly's genes relative to Mark Kelly, the control sample on the ground. And they learned really all kinds of interesting things at the genetic level, things about aging and just some of the bodily changes that Scott Kelly was going through relative to Mark. And that will be really useful for when we want to do longer duration missions, maybe to Mars and beyond. because space is not exactly a conducive environment to humans. So it's really important that we have those tests here. I'm also a big fan of Kate Rubins, who just returned, and she had done a really fascinating project a couple years ago as well, where she did she sequenced the first genomes in space. So really amazing technologies going up, and I'm sure that this expedition will be no different.
Yeah, they
I
get
also
way more sophisticated, don't they? Like they're starting to take up, human tissue with them and doing all kinds of experiments with human chips. It gets more and more exciting, the science on every mission.
It really does, and they're always pushing the boundaries. And it's interesting. We passed two milestones the last year. The ISS, I think it was November, passed 20 years of continuous human occupation, which is amazing when you think like if you're a 20-year-old, you've never lived in a world where there are not people in space. I'm a lot older. I will not say how much, but that is a novelty to me. That's obviously a huge difference in terms of how we approach spaceflight, and it's just kind of well, not taken for granted, but it is just kind of this normal thing to have a crew in space. And then also we just passed the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's first flight, the first man to go to space. And it's kind of interesting to me that it's 60 years. 60 years sounds like a long time, but also a short time for human space flight. I mean, that is easily a lifetime. So, yeah, it's interesting that it's that we're hitting these kinds of milestones right now.
You're absolutely right. It used to be once in a blue moon that we would be lucky enough to watch a launch, but now they seem to be happening every couple of months, especially with SpaceX support. So, somebody who's growing up in this era, this is becoming the norm for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I think there will be also the first all civilian mission, either later this year or early next year, called Inspiration 4. So I think that we're really pushing into the mode of people not only being governmentally trained astronauts that work with these space agencies, and that's really the traditional way that people have gone into space, but also trying to expand access so that people who want to be able to go, but maybe not would not go through an astronaut program or something like that, they can go. So it's a really interesting time, I think. And, it's not only the commercial side of it, there's a lot more international cooperation. And I think that China's space program is very interesting as well. They have done a number of human flights and are developing their space station. So the next couple decades will be fascinating for human space flight, for sure.
That's, I think, is what makes me most excited is the international collaboration. All the international astronauts coming together. Politically, we may not be able to get along and come,
Yeah.
to agreement on a lot of issues. But when it comes to space, I think that we really can set the platform on how to collaborate and work together.
For sure. And to that point, Gilroy, we were talking earlier, there's a kind of tradition of doing these playlists before launches. And so I was looking through some of the songs that the astronauts had selected, and they're all going to be together listening to this. And some of them were interesting, like Learn to Fly, the Foo Fighters. Some of them were like Enter Sandman by Metallica, which I would find quite stressful before a
Great
launch.
song.
Yeah, exactly. Wonderful song. Not what I want to hear when I'm about to go onto a giant explosion. But I was curious, like, what if you were gearing up for this kind of thing? What would you be listening to?
100% drum and bass, like nonstop drum and bass in my ears. That's my hype music. That like gets me really excited. That's what I run to. So it'd be completely a drum and bass playlist for me. What about you?
I don't know. I feel like I'd want to have something kind of like maybe Tchaikovsky or something, a little bit like exciting but also calming. That balance between those between those. I'm not sure. Like, I'd really want to be amped so much as soothed. I'm a very nervous flyer, so the idea of being on a rocket like this is is pretty intense for me. So yeah, I think I'd be the one that was like the very uncool crew member that was like, "Can we just listen to some classical?"
No, you are the sophisticated crew member.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, and it looks like at this point we're on track, 10 minutes to launch. This is, great. And, we had we were actually supposed to have the launch yesterday. They had scrubbed it because of poor weather conditions. So it's really good to see it on track. I had read Thomas Pesquet's tweet about the delay. Buzz Aldrin had apparently advised him once that spacecraft requires a lot of fortitude and patience. So I could tell that he was quite eager to get there, but it looks like they are on track at this point.
Yeah, the cancellations due to weather are quite common. I mean, what is the perfect condition for this to happen?
Yeah, it's actually something I'd like to ask an expert about, really, because I think there's got to be so many factors. And we focus so much on the astronauts, but it's there's thousands of people that contribute to these launches, and experts on the ground making those kinds of calculations. And for us, we might be like, well, why couldn't you maybe launch a little bit later in the day because we're a little bit we're up early today, but it's everything. There's so many factors into making a launch as safe as possible. So I was actually quite interested in the fact that I looked at the Cape Canaveral weather reports, and it looked the same for Thursday and Friday. So I'm not sure what exactly was on. It might have been something that was on the flight path later in the launch. But it really is, these kinds of launches are a huge team effort, and the astronauts are sort of the representation of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They really have to look at the long term of the mission. What is this, 6 months that they're going to be at the International Space Station? They really need to see the whole journey and really be able to forecast how it's going to be safe and fluid for the entire time. 6 months, that's a long time to be up there working together, conducting important science. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear on what it takes to prepare for this kind of mission.
Yeah, and I think also, in addition to these crew launches, there's been a real expansion of commercial cargo vessels of the past decade or so. So there won't only be crews going up; there will be all these resupply missions, and that's a whole. Those are high stakes launches as well. There's tons of equipment on those. There's supplies and food for the astronauts, so you don't want to have to lose one of those. So it's a huge amount of planning, even beyond the human space launches, to be able to get all of these missions supplied properly, and just make sure that all the science can happen.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of focus these days on the fact that many of these launches are happening back on American soil. Why is that so important? Why are you so excited about that?
Well, I think, for one thing, it's great, the fact that Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, that's where Yuri Gagarin first took his flight. It's a historic place, and it's great to be able to launch from there. But you want to have, if sort of as many spaceports as possible, I think, to make sure that you have a steady flow of astronauts and crew. And I think also just symbolically for the United States, because space exploration is a big part of the country's identity. And increasingly, it's not just the U.S. Of course, U.S. partners with JAXA, as you can see with this one, or the European Space Agency. All of these partners, the Canadian Space Agency. We're both Canadian, so we love that. It's a big part of, I think, not only American identity, but almost specifically Cape Canaveral identity, to be able to have human launches there. So I think it's been really nice for people in Florida actually to be able to see these launches again since the retirement of the space shuttle in 2011.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to the day where we're hosting and we get to talk about a Canadian astronaut joining one of these missions. That would be really exciting for me.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's only a matter of time. The crews, these SpaceX and Boeing capsules are very new. I think this is the first time that the European Space Agency has flown one of their astronauts on the Crew Dragon. So it's just going to be a lot of firsts, I think, and that's what's so exciting about these missions in general. You can't do an expedition to the ISS without a bunch of firsts. I had mentioned the genome research, the twin study. It was also really great a year or two ago to see the first all-woman spacewalk, and that was just actually not planned or anything. It was just that those were the qualified people at the time. So it's one of those great things that's a frontier and a groundbreaking moment, but also just natural example of how there's not only scientific firsts, but also like representation firsts that just happen all the time naturally as NASA and Roscosmos and ESA and all their partners continue to do these groundbreaking things.
Yeah, do you think it may have taken a while for international space agencies to really put their trust in SpaceX and sort of see how they deliver?
Yeah, I think it is such a new program, and Commercial Crew really started as an American program. So of course, like each space agency uh, has their own bureaucracies, their own uh, regulations for these kinds of things. I think they probably, SpaceX really had proved themselves over a period of a long time with the cargo vessels. The Dragon cargo vessel has done many flights at this point. So the Crew Dragon is obviously like a very different version. It has life support, it has astronauts on it, but the functional trip of launching it and docking with the ISS and coming back is pretty much the same. So I think at the point that we had the test demo last year with in May with the first flight of the crewed Dragon, that was a really important breakthrough. Now we've had Crew 1 and here we are with Crew 2. So I think it's really shown that it's a robust vehicle, and we'll see probably more and more different space agencies on these commercial flights now.
Great.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting close to launch here, and no delays yet, which is great. It's always a little bit nerve-wracking when you have the countdown and then the sudden pause where you're like, I'm not sure what the issue is, but looks like it's going fine so far. So we might just switch over now to the live feed to watch this launch, and we'll be joining you again right afterwards.
Hi there.
Talking earlier, when we vent off that very cold gaseous oxygen, it'll merge with the warm, humid Florida air, and you'll get a large white plume of condensation off of the back of the strongback. That'll be normal, coming about a minute and a half before launch. Everything continuing to look good.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Dragon is in auto idle.
All right, with that, the Falcon 9 is fully fueled. We have fuel on both the first and second stages, and both stages are filled with liquid oxygen.
Gas closeout has started. Expect loud venting.
Dragon is also in auto idle. The flight computers on Dragon, maintaining their calculations, standing by, waiting for the T0 mark. 1 minute, 15 seconds until launch. The 1 minute mark, Dragon will transition to countdown, and the flight termination system will arm the computers on Falcon 9. We'll be talking to the computers on Dragon and can issue an abort if necessary.
FTS is armed. Falcon 9 is in startup and is now controlling.
Dragon is in countdown.
All right, 50 seconds to go. Everything is ready for an on-time launch today.
Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
Copy, go for launch.
Ground teams are ready, and the crew inside Dragon is ready. 30 seconds to go until launch.
Seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Mission and liftoff. Godspeed, Endeavour and Crew-2.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
Endeavour launches once again. 4 astronauts from 3 countries on Crew-2, now making their way to the one and only International Space Station. The vehicle is pitching downrange. 9 Merlin engines on the first stage, providing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Hearing good calls on first stage performance so far.
We are T plus 30 seconds into the second rotational crew mission on board for Dragon and Falcon 9. Falcon 9 will be throttling down the 9 Merlin engines shortly here in preparation for maximum dynamic pressure. And there's that call out for the throttle down. Maximum dynamic pressure, max Q, is the largest structural load that the vehicle sees throughout ascent. So throttling down does help us pass. Supersonic. Throttling down helps us pass through this period, which should be coming here shortly.
Max Q.
There's that call out that we have just passed through max Q.
Stage 1, throttle up.
And we can
Bravo.
Copy, 1 Bravo.
All right, 1 Bravo is the second abort mode on the first stage. The first stage continues to fire for 2 minutes, 35 seconds. 1.5 minutes into today's flight. Falcon 9 now traveling at more than 1,500 miles an hour.
MVAC engine chill started.
All right, the engine chill for the second stage single Merlin engine has started. About 30 more seconds of the first stage firing to bring our 4 astronauts into orbit.
Now from here, coming up in about 20-some seconds, we're going to have 3 major milestones. We'll have shutdown of the 9 Merlin engines. We're beginning to throttle them down. We will then get stage separation.
1, throttle down.
And then we will get ignition of the second stage engine to propel Dragon and the Falcon 9 second stage into orbit.
Two Alpha.
Copy, 2 Alpha. Confirmed. Acquisition signal lost.
Ignition.
And we have ignition of the second stage. You see the green flash of that T-TEB fluid. The expansion nozzle on the second stage Merlin vacuum glowing that bright red that we like to see. Good performance on the second stage so far.
And on the left side of your screen, we saw the exhaust of the second stage engine streaming past the first stage as the grid fins are coming out. We also briefly had a view of the lights of Central Florida in the background. Currently, the first stage is continuing to coast up to apogee. It's unpowered. It'll reach a peak height and then begin to descend back down toward the Earth's atmosphere, where it will light 3 engines to slow down in preparation for what will be a landing burn on the drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean. You can see the grid fins are deployed right now. The first stage
Dragon,
pulsing.
SpaceX, trajectory nominal.
We're pulsing the thrusters.
Signal of Bermuda.
Copy, nominal trajectory.
And we hear a call out from the crew, nominal trajectory. So we're beginning to move the first stage into position so it can do the entry burn.
Four minutes, 15 seconds into today's flight. Second stage propelling our 4 astronauts up the eastern seaboard. We'll continue to fire. It's a 6-minute burn to deliver the astronauts into orbit. We'll wait for a cue for good orbital insertion after that. Meanwhile, we will be hearing check-ins on the vehicle's
Welcome back to Vice News' live coverage of the Crew-2 launch. It looks like it's going very well. I'm sure there's some relieved astronauts on board as well as everybody on the ground. We're really pleased now to be joined by Kirsten McDonnell. She is the Utilization Planning Team Leader for the European Space Agency's Human Spaceflight and Robotic Exploration Directorate. Thank you, Kirsten, for joining us.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be here.
So how was that for you? You know, I had my breath held up until I heard the round of applause in the control room, and then I could exhale the sigh of relief. How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first launch I've watched, but each one is always so incredible, and we're always so thankful it's not over yet. We'll breathe a big sigh of relief tomorrow when the crew open the hatch and greet their other colleagues that are waiting for them up on orbit. But each one is really spectacular, and I think for every astronaut, even when you look at the logo of the Alpha mission itself, there's the launch, which is really probably the most dramatic event in the astronauts' entire mission.
That's incredible.
To
Now,
that point,
we realize... Sorry, go on, Becky.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was just going to ask. We were discussing earlier that the launch was originally scheduled for yesterday, but was scrubbed due to weather conditions, I think. So there's a lot that goes into when the safest time is to launch. Could you talk about the deliberations a bit that NASA and ESA go through to decide when that point is?
Yes, well, actually, this is really under the control of NASA together with SpaceX. But what happens during that time frame is that even if the weather looks good at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, what's really important is that the weather's good throughout the whole flight path. In case the crew were ever to have to abort the mission, this would imply that they would eject and parachute land into the Atlantic. And so they want to make sure that the ocean waves aren't too choppy, rescue vehicles can get to them on time. And so that's really plays a part in the safety of the crew. So it's not just linked to weather in Kennedy, but basically up the Atlantic coastline of the US all the way up to Canada.
And how long does it take them to reach the ISS? How long is that journey?
It's going to be about 23 hours. So the astronauts on the ISS right now are actually, they don't have a super busy day. A lot of their activities are just preparing for the crew to come. Since today's Friday, and they're going to arrive on a Saturday, this day is a little bit more relaxing, preparing everything, making sure they're ready for their arrival, and then it'll get quite busy in the first few days of the activity. So that's why today's a bit of the rest day, because the next 6 days they'll go nonstop.
Yeah, I'm curious too, not only about that, the trip on board the ISS, but you've trained and prepared a lot of astronauts for these trips. What's that preparation like? How long does that take from when an astronaut is selected for a crew to when they launch, and what's the process like?
So the selection itself can even take about a full year because we get so many candidates in the selection, just filtering that number of people, and then they go through various stages. First of all, do they meet the minimum criteria? Then they're looking at their physical, mental health. And then they go into more and more details about how they can cope with risk, busy workload, and being able to work together as a team, all of those elements when they're finally selected. And then they go through about a year of what they call this basic training to finally kind of be considered qualified astronauts. But that's still just the beginning, just the tip of the iceberg. So then they start working integrated in various teams at NASA and in their respective agencies, depending where they come from. And then once they're assigned a mission, it takes about a year and a half to train them really specifically for that mission. So they get refreshers on all the systems, emergency operations, and then they focus a lot of training on specific activities that will happen during their mission itself. So if they have spacewalks, if they have to perform robotic activities, it requires quite a lot of training. And then also the scientific experiments themselves. Some of them you could basically follow from a procedure similar to like installing, putting together Lego or IKEA furniture or something. Others really require quite a lot of skill and practice in order to get good at it. And so it really depends on what kind of activity they're performing. It's like comparing, knowledge of something and being able to explain it versus driving a car, where more experience you have, more quick you are to react to it, more skillful you are. And so there's various levels of training, like I was mentioning. The EVA takes place in the water to train for spacewalks to try and mimic that the lack of gravity when they're performing the spacewalks. And so the water simulates that as best as we can on Earth, but it's never quite the same as once they're on orbit.
What about the psychological training? How do you mentally prepare for this kind of mission?
Really good question. So a big part of it is, first of all, just to see the background of people, what kind of experience they have, how they handle working as a team, if they've ever handled risky situations. So that's why often you'll hear astronauts are previous pilots, or they've had military experience, or in their civilian lives, they've worked in remote areas like, in the tundra, or We have Concordia Station in Antarctica, where it's a research center. So that experience of being very far and isolated, where it's also an underwater laboratory called NEMO off the coast of Florida, where the astronauts will go and perform missions there. So it's very intensive. They stay underwater the entire time, could be about 2 weeks or so. We also have cave training, where we put astronauts together and they explore caves for several days at a time. And this also helps to see how they're open to working to teamwork, see what kind of leadership skills some of them have, because later some of them will eventually become potentially commanders of the space station, for example. So all of those things come throughout from their previous experience, and we try to see that during the selection. And then once they are selected, as they go through their training and they have these types of opportunities, it allows them more and more to refine those kinds of more, let's call it soft skills or mental skills.
It's interesting to hear that they are exposed to such extreme environments. First, there will be on this particular expedition a couple of spacewalks to install these rollout solar arrays. Can't imagine a more extreme environment than being on the outside of the ISS. I mean, it's crazy enough to be on the inside. So could you tell us a little bit about those solar arrays when they're arriving and what that installation process will be like?
So those solar arrays are arriving in the trunk of SpaceX 23, which is planned to arrive in early June. And so this comes in the unpressurized part of the SpaceX capsule. So the crew part is above, and then just below that, there's an unpressurized part that can hold experiments and cargo that is designed to be installed on the outside of the space station. And so once SpaceX 23 arrives and docks, the crew will be performing an EVA, and this is where this spacewalk actually will take them quite far out onto the furthest reaches of the truss where the solar panels are. So some spacewalks are closer to the inner part of the station. You see how the station is sort of a long cylindrical shape, and so the spacewalks that are more linked to payloads that are on the outside of those modules, you're very close to the station itself, even though it's still, in outer space. But these spacewalks, they'll be going further out on the truss. They're going to make use of the same system, rotating mechanical system of the current solar panels, and be installed to roll out using that same system. So they'll partially cover the existing solar panels, but they are with more higher technology and quite good at they will be excellent for supporting these aging solar panels that were first installed in 2000, and then more so in 2006, and then again in 2009.
Now, the Crew-2 team are going to be replacing the Crew-1 team. How does a shift change happen in space? I think it's about 4 days, but it sounds pretty crowded. And how does it work?
Yeah, it's pretty crowded. There are 7 more, let's call it permanent sleeping areas on the space station. And so during this shift change, we'll be up to 11 astronauts on orbit. And so some of them will actually be sleeping in what we call camp-out locations. Some astronauts, one astronaut can even sleep in SpaceX itself. So go back to the vehicle and sleep in the same place where they, the same area roughly from where they were sitting when they launched. And so it is a bit tricky, but that's indeed why this teamwork comes into play. And during that time, what's also interesting is that when we perform human research experiments, a lot of those experiments require a last session just before the crew leave the space station. So they've been up there 6 months, and they perform several sessions on orbit, often at the very beginning, sometime in the middle, and then towards the end. And so that's another thing to balance, is that getting those final sessions finished, which most of them are, but there may be some experiments that still require some sessions very close to the undocking and return. And similarly, these crew members that are coming on Crew-2 will be performing those early data sets, those early sessions for human research when they arrive. And so that's why this time frame is extremely busy, requires extremely good planning and coordination, which we start months in advance with all of our partners by performing a preliminary planning, giving them the whole bulk of all the experiments, and then really looking day to day. If we take into account their sleep time, their exercise time, their eating time, and then finally you have the time that remains in order to perform science activities. And we try and really make the best use of that, but also make sure that we've tested all of this very well on the ground so that our timings are right and we don't make them feel super rushed when they're on orbit, and they have the time they need to perform the activities they have to perform. We're also spending a lot of money essentially on the development of our experiments, so we do want to make sure they go smoothly. So there's a lot of testing on the ground that's performed, and we do perform this end-to-end kind of experiment sequence test where step by step the ops support sensors develop procedures where they make sure that step by step when the astronauts install the hardware all the way to commanding that hardware from the ground, getting the data, and then finally some of this hardware actually gets downloaded again for analysis on the ground, especially if it's samples from human research or from biological payloads.
That's just amazing. And it just got word that the Falcon 9 booster has landed safely on the SpaceX drone ship, a very cool new technology. So it seems like the launch is going along well. Kirsten, thank you so much for talking to us about all the complexities of these missions, especially during such a busy time, this launch. We really appreciate all of your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was truly interesting to hear from the European Space Agency side. Yeah.
On the solar arrays, but I tried to sneak in some experiment stuff in there so that people understand what it takes to get them ready for launch and for the mission.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's so important. That launch is such an exciting part, but the actual mission is just beginning, and it will be something that our viewers should certainly keep tabs on for the next 6 months as Expedition 65 continues.
Yeah, excellent. That's going to be great. So sorry about the beginning of the call. I was just finishing the ESA one, and it went to... Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize.
Oh no, that's totally fine. We will let you go though, because I know actually it's like a super busy time for you. Unless we have time to talk a little bit more, or should we?
Yeah, if you have.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you so much, Kirsten. That was brilliant.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks
for your insight.
So yeah, very interesting to hear from ESA's side and all of the interesting things that they're going to be doing during this mission. You have any thoughts on Kirsten's insights there, Guillory?
It was really fascinating to hear about the training and just what they go through and the selection process just to get to this moment. There's so much work and effort that goes into it, but the land-based training that they go through to me was really interesting.
Yeah, and it is just to have the coordination of all of the cargo ships, as we were talking about before, in addition to the actual crewed launches. It takes an enormous amount of organization. And one of the things I wanted to sort of set up now is the fact that this is not the first crew vehicle that is in development. We also had the chance to talk to NASA astronaut Mike Fink, who will be on the crew of the first Starliner, which is the Boeing vehicle. So I think we're going to throw to that now and see some of his thoughts. We were able to talk to him about the upcoming launch, and he's been in that situation many times. He's gone to space 3 times, so I was super interested to hear his ideas about it. NASA is gearing up to launch the second commercial crew rotation to the International Space Station with its commercial partner SpaceX. Here to talk with us about the upcoming launch and science mission is Mike Fink, a NASA astronaut who has been to space 3 times and is actually due for a 4th. Thank you, Mike.
Great to be here, and thank you for helping us share this really awesome story.
Oh, it's so exciting. And, I wanted to start with Given the fact that you've been to space 3 times, you're a veteran of space flight. Could you kind of take us into what the mindset and routine is as astronauts prepare during that last day and lead up to liftoff? What's going on in the headspace and in the daily routine?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. For the past 2 weeks, my colleagues have been in quarantine. Now, when a year ago, maybe our listeners and viewers didn't understand that as much, but now we've all been astronauts and been in quarantine, and so they've been away from the kind of family and friends. We've gotten the families allowed to they've got medically cleared, so they're spending a little time with their families. But this last 2 weeks is a chance to rest a little bit, catch up on any sleep, because it's been a mad dash to get here. And then as soon as you get to space station, it doesn't end for 6 months. Even on the days off, you're not really off. You're not able to go spend time with your family. So it's a time to just to relax just a little bit and then focus on the mission. And the next part of the mission is the launch and docking to the International Space Station. And even though we spend 6 months training, just focusing on launch and landing. The actual launch itself is something like 10 minutes. So 1 minute you're on the launch pad, 10 minutes later you're up in space and weightless and see beautiful Earth below.
So all of that preparation, and then it's like this very, I'm sure, intense but short ride up. Yeah, it's really interesting that you've flown on the shuttle, you've flown on the Soyuz, and now you're due to fly on Boeing's Starliner, the other commercial crew vehicle that's in development right now. I wanted to just ask, do you have a favorite of these? Is it like choosing your favorite child or something?
It's exactly like choosing your favorite child, because each one is different, right? And getting a chance to go to space is awesome. And it was really neat flying with the Russians. I launched off of Yuri Gagarin's launch pad twice. Poor old Yuri, he only launched once off his own launch pad. So yeah, so that's modern life. It's designed to be ergonomically efficient. In other words, it's kind of like economy class seating. You're kind of all scrunched up, but once you get to space, you can spread out a little bit. Space shuttle was a magnificent thing. It was so much room. We could fit 7 or 8 people for launch, not just the 3 that the Soyuz has. So we had plenty of leg room. So it was kind of like business class a little bit. And then these new spacecraft, through the commercial crew program, the Crew Dragon and the Starliner, which hopefully we'll be launching later this year, they got some leg room. They're ergonomically efficient, but they can fit a wide variety of people, from shorter people to very tall people, which we had, I don't say troubles, but we had to limit who could fly in space when we only flew the Soyuz, because you must be shorter than this tall to ride.
Wow. Yeah. And with the Soyuz too, as you mentioned, with the 3-seater, this will be an interesting transition to go to the 4-seat. What's the advantage for NASA to have that extra seat on these rides and then having 7-person crews up on ISS?
Yeah, 7-person crews is going to be another big breakthrough for us. On my very first mission, we had trouble with the space shuttle, so we were launching from Soyuz and only having resupply from the Russian Progress. So there's only enough food and water for 2 of us. So 2 people on my first mission. My second mission, we had 3 people at any one time, but we set it up so that there could be 6-person crews. And with 6-person crews aboard space station, we were able to really get a lot of science done. But there's a lot of overhead in terms of running the space station, because it's like on a camping trip. You always need people to take care of the equipment and things like that. But once we have a 7th person, our amount of science and how much science time we can dedicate to science is actually going to be more than 1/4 greater. It's almost going to double our ability to do science aboard space station. So this is going to be great. We get a lot of really important science done. Some really interesting work gets done off of the Earth to make life better on the Earth.
Yeah, and what's some of the advantages of working in that microgravity environment that this new expedition will be, enjoying sometimes, but also, hard at work at?
Yeah, so they're going to be doing a fair amount of biological experiments, and when you take gravity out of the equation, you can find some of the underlying mechanisms that are harder to find in gravity. They're working on an interesting experiment from Target company, the place that sells all kinds of home essentials, but also they're sponsoring some research into sustainable cotton to help make cotton plants easier to grow on planet Earth, and it's kind of a renewable resource. So that's just one small example of many things. We've been focusing a lot on genomic research up in space, again, taking gravity out of the equation and seeing how genes express themselves. We also did some fundamental work with messenger RNA, which didn't lead directly, but was part of the body of knowledge as we developed these new vaccines for COVID. So we get better medicines, we get more efficient gasoline engines because we understand combustion better. We just understand the universe better, and that's just the pure science. We also test out new engineering kind of things in low Earth orbit. So when we go to the moon, we're going to have a good food system, a good water system, a good recycling system, a breathing air system that doesn't cost a lot of mass to send to the moon, because that's pretty expensive, and space is at a limitation.
I'd love to talk about how, it's obviously a really awesome thing to have so many applications for Earth. But yeah, this new push out with Artemis to be sending crews back to the moon again. How does the ISS help to create that kind of foundational research so that we can reach out to other bodies like that?
So when we flew Apollo to the moon and space shuttles to Earth, we were just visiting. So Apollo missions were just a few days at a time. Space shuttle missions were a couple weeks. Well, with the International Space Station, we've learned how to live in space. We learned how the human body adapts. We learned how to recycle our resources. Like, we're over 90% of our water gets recycled aboard space station. That's good for when we go to the moon, because water is going to be at a premium. But also here on planet Earth, when water becomes is becoming a little bit, fresh water is a little bit more scarce, we learn how to recycle better. So there's definite applications. But now when we go back to the moon, we're not just going to visit again, because some people like to point out, we've been there, done that, it's boring. It's like, no, we're going to go live there. We're going to have bases on the moon, and this is fantastic. And it's going to be economically viable to do that. And having low Earth orbit available for companies, we're going to actually make another industry, and we're in the process of making another industry for the United States. Just like we invented the airplane and sell a lot of airplanes now, and space satellites, well, we're going to have a lot more low Earth orbit industry, and that's going to go to the moon too. So it's a really exciting time, and it's fun to be part of it.
That's super thrilling. And, one of the great aspects of going to space, even low Earth orbit or to the moon, is this wonderful view you get of our planet, something that you just cannot get that perspective shift here on Earth. And could you describe a bit, when you first saw Earth from space and the times that you've been there, what's the sort of feeling of taking in our planet on that scale?
Becky, what a really insightful question. I'm a steely-eyed Air Force guy, and nothing impresses me. And but my very first time, and probably my second, third times in space too, just look out the window and see the Earth from orbit. I was breathless. I mean, literally, it was breathtaking. I couldn't breathe for 30 seconds, and I'm not one to get that excited. And it's just incredible. As a planetary scientist, well, first when I was a little kid, I liked Saturn, the planet Saturn, the beautiful rings. And then as a planetary scientist, I studied Mars and Moon. And I said, oh yeah, those are the best planets, even though Moon's not technically a planet. But then now my favorite planet is planet Earth. Absolutely most beautiful planet in the solar system, probably the most beautiful planet in the galaxy, home of all of humanity. And you just truly appreciate how thin our atmosphere is if you look along the edge of planet Earth and just say, wow, everything that's we've ever done and made, and it's right down there on planet Earth. And we're taking our first baby steps to leave Earth and go explore the solar system. And it's just an incredible feeling. And more and more people, we've only had like 500 or 600 people go to space. And I think as more and more people over the next 10 years, I'm aiming that we have 5,000 people in space. And within 20 years, we're going to have like 50,000 and small, even little colonies of people in space. And we're going to truly appreciate our planet even better. More people that see it, the more people believe it.
For sure. And there's actually, one of the fun things about this crew is that there's 2 international members. It kind of relates into the fact that we would like to have more and more people from different nations visiting the ISS. France and Japan, the two astronauts where they're from, that we have, of course, had astronauts there before. But, could you talk a little bit more about how it's kind of a little bit groundbreaking to have two international members and, that idea of trying to get as many people who want to go to space be able to travel there?
Yeah, so building new rockets and new spacecraft that go on top of the rockets is a bit tricky, and it can be dangerous. And so we sent up only two people up on the first Crew Dragon Demo 2 just about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's the same capsule that we're using, the Endeavour capsule. And but our international partners, they had to trust us, and they had to look at the test results and see what safety measures we took. The Europeans watched as we sent up Crew-1, and now we're sending up Crew-2, and our international partners are confident enough in our technology and with the SpaceX Crew-Dragon that they're willing to put their people on board. And we did the same thing when we started sending people aboard Soyuz. We asked the Russians a lot of the safety things, and the Russians hopefully will come aboard and fly on our spacecraft, and we'll continue flying on Soyuz. That way we'll always have one of a Russian and an American aboard the space station. If anything were ever to go awry, or if there was launch delays or something like that, we always have a surety to go to space. And it also enhances our partnership when we fly together in space.
It's wonderful that there's so many different vehicles, and yours as well in development. I'm very excited to see the Starliner flight. I thank you so much for your time here, and I'm very much looking forward to Crew-2, and I'm sure you are as well. Knowing what.
Yeah, go Crew-2. Each and every one of them are my friends, and I know them very well, and it's going to be great to see them floating in space. And then we're a week later, we're shooting for the 28th of April to have Crew-1 come safely back down and splash down off the coast of Florida. So these are exciting times, and we're really glad that you're helping to share this story, because there's a lot of really cool things going on, not to mention Moon and Mars and all the things that we're looking forward to.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to share it. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for the interview.
So as you can see, I was pretty stoked to talk to Mike Fink there. And I think it's really especially cool that someone who's been on the Soyuz twice, someone who's been on the space shuttle, actually on the last, second to last space shuttle that ever flew, and now he's going to be on the first Starliner. So I believe he's the first American since John Young to be on 3 different vehicles. And so it's a really interesting experience I'm sure, to be able to, I don't know, chart so many different courses in space.
Yeah, it's so brilliant to have the privilege to speak to astronauts. Don't you find they all have this incredibly humble and calm demeanor? There's something about the experience that really makes them better human beings.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think it takes quite a lot of ego too to do it, but there's so much shaving off of that, because it's such a collaborative enterprise, not only with their fellow astronauts, but also with all the ground team. And then, you can't, I think there is something, and Mike spoke to this a little bit, the kind of overview effect idea. There's a lot of astronauts who come back from space having looked at Earth and have a really different perspective on things. And, they're probably already, a lot of them are scientists or pilots or things like that. So they have already this kind of different perspective on a lot of these issues. But seeing the actual act of seeing the entire Earth, where you don't see the national map boundaries, where you see how interconnected everything is, and all the river systems and oceans are just totally interconnected with our civilization. It's really, they describe it as like a very life-changing experience a lot of the time. And certainly it seems like that was, he was talking about how he's a really steely-eyed pilot, and even he was pretty emotional seeing it for the first time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Many of them come back and become strong environmentalists and activists in their own right. That experience of viewing the blue marble from up there really is emotional and visceral and quite life-changing, I imagine.
Yeah, we just had Earth Day yesterday, and it's always really fun for me to see the Carl Sagan pale blue dot quote come up, and that wonderful picture. It's just truly amazing. I believe taken by Voyager. I think taken by the Voyagers. it's just Earth, in this like little shadow of light, and it's tiny, and it really brings home that this is the only world we got. It's very small in the scheme of things, and it's beautiful, and we really do need to take care of it as much as it's. I think it's interesting too, the perspective shift. By leaving it, you kind of realize what you have on the planet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, earlier in the year, I got the chance to interview NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. Now, he was the test pilot on the Crew Dragon, which essentially means he was the first American astronaut to fly these vehicles, which it takes a lot of courage in itself. I wanted to share that interview with you because I think he brought a lot of interesting perspective to the story.
Let's do it.
So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
Well, my name is Doug Hurley. I've been a NASA astronaut for 20 years. I've flown on 2 shuttle flights, including the last shuttle flight in history, as well as the first Crew Dragon flight earlier this year.
And how much more advanced is the technology on Crew Dragon compared to the space shuttle that you flew last on in 2011? And how has that changed the experience for you as an astronaut?
Yeah, great question. The technology is incredible. I mean, we had touchscreens on Crew Dragon, whereas shuttle initially had what we call steam gauges and buttons and knobs, and we had none of those things to any degree on board Crew Dragon. It just was a much cleaner, smoother design. Certainly a different capability. The shuttle was very capable and got to do a lot of different things, but Dragon feels like almost a sleek sports car, and shuttle was more of a truck.
That's a great comparison. Can you explain the flight experience for us earthbound humans? What's the visceral feeling of doing something like this?
Yeah, it's certainly incredible. Every time you get to do it, the sensations that you feel in microgravity turn you into a child again. You want to do somersaults and flips and bounce off the walls and the ceiling. But it's interesting because your body goes through some changes. Your fluid shifts from your kind of well distributed throughout your body up to your head, and you kind of work through that. You kind of feel like you have a cold for a few days when you first get into orbit. And then getting adjusted to life in orbit, everything is a little bit harder to do because you don't have the aid of gravity, and getting used to that. And then, of course, we exercise a couple hours a day in space in order to stay healthy and keep our bone density at a level so we're not really compromised when we get back to Earth, especially for the folks that stay for a very long time. And so it's just, and then add that to the view that you get outside the window, looking back down at our incredible planet. It's just such an emotional experience. I think all of us work very hard as professional astronauts to even become an astronaut. Years and years and years of hard work and dedication, and then the years that you work to get to space. Once you are an astronaut, it is a very emotional event. It's certainly the first time, and I think for this time for me, because it was the first time we had tested a new vehicle in over 30 years.
Yeah, that's incredible. Tell me a little bit about how you stay calm before launching, especially when you are the first crew to be testing a new vehicle, as you say.
Yeah, it's probably a combination of things. We worked a long time, Bob and I worked a long time with SpaceX, and, very much involved every week with the process. So we were very confident in not only what SpaceX was doing, but the people that were doing the work. They just have an impressive group of people out there in Hawthorne and in McGregor. They have a site in McGregor as well, Kennedy Space Center, and just a wonderful, intelligent, creative group. And so you have confidence not only in the design of the vehicle, but you have confidence in the people that are doing the work. And then the other part of it is, I came from a fighter pilot background, a test pilot background. And so in a sense, this has been my whole professional career, has been risk-taking with an understanding that it was a controlled risk, it was a calculated risk, and so this to me felt just like that. And I think the other thing is it was my third flight, so maybe the emotions are a little bit more in check than maybe my first flight might have been. But I think it's a combination of all those things. But in the end, it was the confidence in the SpaceX team, our commercial crew team, and in my crewmate Bob Behnken.
So, in other words, you've got nerves of steel.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I mean, and I think it's in the end, you understand the risk before you even undertake these types of things. Your family understands the risks, but you have to come to terms with that. If the risk and the worry of what might go wrong is dominating your thoughts, then it's probably time to do something different in a career.
How do you even prepare for this type of mission? I know simulators are key. Has that technology advanced quite a bit as well?
I think, like everything else, the simulators are just better now. SpaceX developed a couple simulators for us to train on, and the thing that was most surprising to me was how well the emulation of the simulators were to the actual vehicle. Now, you certainly can't simulate 0G on Earth in a simulator very easily, or at all. But it just was amazing to me how accurate they were with what the vehicle would sound like inside, how the vehicle would perform if I was flying it manually, and just the different phases of flight and what we saw in a simulator, how it was exactly the same in space. And I think that gives you a tremendous amount of confidence, especially if you're the next crew, knowing that the training is very, very accurate and very close to what you're going to experience for real. And so I think it was a tremendous testament to their team and to the technology that we have these days.
That's incredible. What's it like being an astronaut during a global pandemic? How did that affect your job?
It's a great question. It affected us hugely because we were actually in California training in March at SpaceX, like we had been for every week for the last almost 2 years. And then we finished our training, I believe, on a Tuesday or Wednesday and flew back to Houston. And by Friday or Saturday that weekend in March, the borders were kind of shut down. The country was kind of going into lockdown. And then we had to adapt because, like anything, the mission launch dates weren't going to change. We were going to try to work towards the launch date we had. There was a lot depending on getting to this point with Crew-1, where we had operational flights with crews from the United States. And so the NASA team and the SpaceX team really adapted to try to keep everybody safe, not only Bob and I, but the training teams, both here in Houston and out in Hawthorne, California. And then, of course, our flight docs were involved. And it was tough because, you know, it really involved a lot of challenges to everybody. But in the end, we never got sick. We didn't affect the launch date, and we were able to get on board space station, which, as I'm sure you realize, there's no COVID on space station.
Oh, that's incredible. And how significant is it to have these kinds of launches departing from American soil?
I personally think it's incredibly significant and incredibly important. I mean, you know, we're the United States, and we have been a spacefaring nation since the beginning of the space program. And to have the gap that we had where we weren't flying from the United States. Now, I think people think we stopped flying in space completely and that the space program in the United States ended. That's not really true. We were continuing to fly our astronauts on board Russian Soyuz spacecraft. So we continued to have U.S. astronauts going to and from the space station. And of course, during that time, we were working hand in hand with both Boeing and SpaceX to develop the capability to return launches to the United States. And here we are.
You know, Becky, that interview with Doug really reminded me of how remarkable it is that these launches have been successfully happening during this past year of struggle and hardship with the coronavirus. The fact that they've been able to make these go off without any glitch, coordinate, and bring people together is really something remarkable in itself.
It is such an extra layer of complexity to add to an already complex situation. And as you can imagine, if the virus had ever made it to the ISS, that's an emergency situation. There's no way to social distance on the station. Not to mention that all of the air is being recycled. So it's just, a disaster waiting to happen. So the fact that NASA and its partners, they're always thinking many, many steps ahead, but it's incredibly difficult to anticipate something like that. And yet they've been able to keep the crew safe and, and also keep the ground team safe. It was interesting even just the other day watching the Ingenuity flight, the first flight on Mars, and seeing, everybody in the ground team still wearing masks and still distancing. And they've really done an amazing job of prioritizing safety.
Yeah, and I'm sure if the coronavirus did happen to make its way onto the ISS, that they have a protocol for it, that they have a plan, and that's really how these things happen so smoothly.
Yeah. I think I had talked to someone last year about that, and they can get down from the ISS in emergency within 12 hours or so. So there's always that option, although you don't want to have to take it. But yeah, there's multiple contingencies for everything. And I think, honestly, I really felt that the launch of the Crew demo and Crew-1 and now Crew-2 and a lot of the Perseverance Mars mission stuff over the past year has been this kind of bright spot in a very, very tough time. And, I think now it's always good to remember what science can do. And we have the vaccines rolling out now that are a great reminder of that it pertains exactly to the pandemic. But in the meantime, it was just great that those missions didn't get delayed and that we could enjoy the fact that we're still doing really enterprising stuff, even in one of the worst crises in decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know while we wait for word that the crew have arrived to the ISS safely in the next 24 hours or so, what are you looking forward to next? What's exciting and what's coming up?
Yeah, I guess you mean in space generally.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for Perseverance and a lot of the stuff that it's doing. I have a particular love for the Parker Solar Probe mission, which is a sun surfing mission that's going on right now. So it's going to be that it's more of a 4-year kind of a thing. Over the next 4 years, it's going to be getting closer and closer to the sun, which is an object that's rather important. So I'm really looking forward to that. And, it'll be interesting to see in terms of these human spaceflight missions. NASA wants to return to the moon this decade, return crews to the lunar surface with its Artemis program, has many international partners on that. So I will be very interested to see how that develops. It would be amazing to see a man and a woman back on the moon. It would be the first mission to put a woman on the moon. So that's something exciting to look forward to as well. Yeah. How about you? Do you have anything in particular coming up?
Yeah, I'm really just stoked on these international collaborations. I want to see what other countries step forward and join these types of missions. I feel that to me is what I get the most excited about, the international collaboration, what they're bringing to the picture in terms of science and research. And yes, I definitely want to see Canada on that list.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It was interesting, too, to see that China now has its first mission at Mars, or its first orbiter. They're going to try to land their first rover next month. And the United Arab Emirates also has an orbiter for the first time around Mars. So you're right that it's a very interesting time where there's a ton of different new spacefaring nations making their mark. And I think that, there is a lot of conflict on Earth, but international collaboration off Earth is one of these great examples of how we can collaborate to do these amazing things. And to that point, the Crew-2 now on its way, going to deliver this very international crew to a very international collaborative space project that has been a huge success for decades now. It was really, really fantastic to talk to you about this, Guillory. Thank you so much for joining and co-hosting. I also want to express our gratitude to our guests today, to Kirsten McDonald, to Mike Fink, and Doug Hurley. Super awesome to talk to all of them and all of their expertise and insights on this.
Yeah, this was a brilliant collaboration on our behalf, and I just want to say thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, especially if you're on the West Coast like me and staying up for this exciting, moment. It's nice to have you guys on board.
Yep, wherever you are in the world, hope you enjoyed the launch, and we'll see you for the next one.